Success is about what you can contribute back to society once you become successful.
Don Lam, CEO and founding partner of VinaCapital, the leading investment fund in Southeast Asia. A leader in general needs to have compassion.
And a leader should have a combination, work ethic, being aggressive, but also had to be compassionate. Logistics is much more than just trucking, like you said, or shipping.
What is success for you?
It's about balance between work, life, and family.
Welcome to this new edition of Doc and Talk KLU's interview series, where we ask questions to personalities who have something to say about leadership, management style, a little bit about logistics, supply chain management, and other things. Today I am very happy to have with us Don Lam, CEO and founding partner of VinaCapital, the leading investment fund in Southeast Asia. You have approximately $4 billion in assets spanning venture capital, energy, hospitality, and real estate. So thank you very much for having accepted to do this little interview with me. Before I ask my questions, maybe I'm gonna tell a little bit about you. So if I'm correct, because I had to take the information and translate it into English from Vietnamese, so there might have been some information, gone wrong. But please correct me if I'm wrong. So, and you have a story to tell. At the age of 10, 11, around, you with your family, you fled Vietnam as the kind of boat people.
Yes.
You fled to Hong Kong. From Hong Kong, you went to Canada. And you and your family started to work in a factory, more or less cleaning floors.
Yes.
And at some point, your family decided, okay, we're opening up a little convenience store in downtown Toronto, where you actually, if I'm correct, worked at the cash register.
Yes.
And probably you liked the cash register so much that you decided to study commerce and political science, and you became a chartered accountant and started your career at PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Yes.
And at some point, at I think 24, you decided, I'm going to go back to Vietnam. You opened the representative office for PricewaterhouseCoopers. Your family was not really convinced that this is the best decision you could take, going back to Vietnam. They actually thought you were crazy.
Yes.
So my first question, why did you go back to Vietnam? What was the drive? What was the reason that you wanted to go back?
Well, firstly, I was born in Vietnam, so culturally, you always have this feeling of wanting coming back and doing something and contributing to Vietnam. Although I grew up in Canada, and I'm a proud Canadian. I'm holding a Canadian passport, but there's always this feeling that you want to go back and do something.
But your siblings had not the same feeling. If I'm
Yes, my sibling is slightly different. My sibling, they grew up in Canada, and they're quite comfortable in Canada, and they decided to stay. But for me, I've always been a bit more entrepreneurship in my family. So I want to build something new in a frontier market, and Vietnam is definitely a market where there's a great opportunity for young people. At that time, I was 26 when I first came back. Give me an opportunity to do something new and exciting.
Okay, so you came back with 26, PricewaterhouseCoopers. You built this representative office.
Yes.
And when you were, I think, 34, 35, or in your 30s, you decided, now I'm going to do my own thing, and you established VinaCapital.
Yes.
That decision, why at that moment? Was PricewaterhouseCoopers not interesting anymore, or why did you choose to do this move?
Well, firstly, it's a tough decision. PricewaterhouseCoopers at that time, I was a partner looking after the financial advisory services, which is a great job, good pay, and potentially you can become a senior partner at some point. But I thought that in your mid-30, you have the experience, you still have a lot of energy to actually start out something new. And I decided to, I'm always been very entrepreneur, so I want to start something new. And VinaCapital is what I started because I thought it's the right time.
Okay. And I think it was the right time because
the right
you're very successful with VinaCapital, well, with your career. What is success for you? Like, how would you define it, and do you think, or has it changed over the years?
Yes, when I was younger, when I first graduated from school, or when I was studying, success is all about financial return. How much money you're gonna make, what bonus you're gonna get. Success is always about financial. But as time move on, time change, I think success is totally different. Success is about balance between work, life, and family. Success is about what you can contribute back to society once you become successful. So it's no longer just financial. So it's many different things in life that you need to balance out.
Okay, so what is your work-life balance? Because at some point you said, I'm working 7 days a week. That was a couple of years back. I think in some interview I read that. So what is actually your work-life balance? Can you have a work-life balance with your schedule?
At the moment, I think it's difficult, but trying my best if we can balance it out. For example, I took a week off last week just to go back to Canada and visit my parents. That decision is very critical because even though October, November is a very busy time for us before the year end, but I decided to do it anyway. So I'm trying to, now I have the 4-3-2-1 rules. 40% of your time should be with family.
40.
So it's the number one priority at this time in my life.
Yeah.
30% of your time is business and work.
Okay.
20% of your time is friends and activity that you like to do. That's 20. The 1% left, or 1 is 10%, is whatever that come that you don't plan for. So it's a 4-3-2-1. So family, business, friendship, and then whatever comes.
Okay. In this rule, where is VinaCapital Foundation? Is that in the 30% or in the 10%?
I think the VinaCapital Foundation would be the 20% at the moment,
Okay.
because that's where you spend time to do things that you love to do with your friends or with the foundation, things that you want to do.
So you created VinaCapital Foundation in 2006.
Yes.
With the mission to empower children and youth in Vietnam through health and education programs, offering life-saving opportunities for poor children with health issues. How did you get this idea, and why? Obviously, to give
Sure.
back to society, and why this? I mean, not it's great, but how this specificity about health issues? I mean,
Right.
Was there a reason?
Well, firstly, as I start the VinaCapital business, I realized that a lot of places we investing in, a lot of provinces we're investing in, is quite poor. And so we decided to give something back to area where we invest. And the first criteria is people in the society that need the most help. So that's children. Because children, they have a great future, but without help, they cannot grow. And so a lot of poor kids. And then we decided to focus on two key areas, health and education. Because you can do many different things, but you need to focus. When you're trying to help, you got very, very focused so that you do it well and do it right. So that's why we started to give back, but also looking at area where we invest in the poor area, because we invest across Vietnam. That's how we saw the foundation work. Is we should invest in area, we should help in area where we invest. And that's why it started. And we start with kids because they're the most vulnerable. They the part of society need the most help.
This shows a lot of compassion, obviously, from your side. Do you think a leader in general needs to have compassion?
Time changed because when I first started VinaCapital, I just feeling that I just need to win. I need to be aggressive. I need to grow my business. So compassion was not part of the thinking. But after 2 or 3 years of running the business, what you see in society and what you work with staff, then you change over time. I think as the older you get, the more compassionate you become. Maybe perhaps you don't have much time left in your life. Perhaps you see a lot more hardship in and around you. So you become more compassionate, I believe, over time. And a leader should have a combination of work ethic, being aggressive, but also have to be compassionate. And these criteria, your staff will see it, your business partner will see it, and I think it benefits the business.
I think Fortune magazine once gave you the title of Vietnam's Wolf of Wall Street, and I was asking myself, how does that go together with the compassion side? But so you're not the wolf of Wall Street any longer?
No, I think somehow they because in the early days we done a lot of transaction, a lot of M&A transaction, which is new in Vietnam, and so I think that's a title that sort of stuck, but not really what I'm aiming for. Definitely, I think now I'm much more compassionate than that title.
Okay. Any other characteristics for a good leader? So you need some being a little bit of aggressive, being very compassionate. Other things a good leader should have?
I think a good leader mainly should listen, because some leader they just talk and just give command. But I think a good leader should listen. Listen to your partner, your employee, people around you, because once you listen, you really understand what they want. Then you can formulate a solution or work toward those goals. But some leaders don't listen. Number two, I believe very important for a leader is you need to prove by acting. You just don't talk about it. If you talk to people, you say you're compassionate, but you're not doing it, it won't happen. So only two things: and you listen, and you need to act on. You need to practice what you preach.
Is that also when you decide to invest in some project, venture capital? Is that how you choose your projects? Are you looking into the team and say, okay, this is somebody who listens, who acts?
Well, the most important, I guess, in investment is always the management team. That's the most critical. So when we invest, the most important is we need to spend time with the founder of the business, a lot of time, to get a feel for how would they run the business. Are they practicing what they are saying? And you're right. So this is like one of the key criteria when we invest. Is making sure the founder, the leader, do what they say.
So how can I imagine there's somebody coming to you and asking, okay, I want to have some money, I need some investment from you. What do you do?
Well, firstly, I guess we have two parts of it. One is the team. We need to look at the business and the numbers and the factual. And then the senior people in the investment would need to spend time with the founder, spend time in terms of going through the business. Yes, we do a lot more social activity in Vietnam than perhaps in Europe, whereby you may have to go to dinner with them 5-10 times or lunch or meeting many times before you make a decision with whether you invest in the business or not.
Do I have to drink?
Very good question. Very good question. I would say 10-15 years ago, you would need to drink because it's how you collaborate or get close to somebody. But I think in the last 10 years or so, not as much because people are now more health conscious. Drinking is not required. And if there is drinking, it would be a lot lighter. Before it was mostly whiskey, but now it's more maybe red wine.
Well, good to know because the red wine is already enough for me, So with whiskey,
so now it's much better, much better.
Okay, that's funny. You are considered, or I think you would consider yourself as a Viet Q.
Yes.
Can you explain what that is?
Okay. Well, there's two terms. Sometimes they call us overseas Vietnamese, or the shorter form, more popular, it's called VQ. VQ is essentially Vietnamese descendant who living offshore, abroad. So, for example, I'm considered VQ because I'm Vietnamese descendant and I lived in Canada for a long time, and then I came back here. So I believe at the moment over 3 million VQ living somewhere around the world.
Has that influenced your leadership style, like the Canadian?
Sure, a lot actually, because the time that I spent and grew up in Canada, it gives you a different perspective, a more international perspective. So when I came back to Vietnam, I did bring some of those perspectives back here when I do business. So that helped a lot to connect Western cultural and business and technology and funding to the business opportunity in Vietnam. So those two are a good mix, actually. And so many of the VQ working in the multinational company here, they bring the same skill set.
Then again, they bring different skill sets because they're all coming from different backgrounds. First of all, it definitely probably influenced the leadership style in Vietnam, but then also I imagine it's difficult because you see another Vietnamese, but they have maybe a complete different background,
Sure.
one from Japanese background,
Sure.
some French background. So how is that? Must be kind of exciting, no?
It's very exciting because actually if you grew up in Germany, you would have a different thinking and background than a person who grew up in Japan, because the Japanese culture will influence them.
Yes.
Or if you grew up in US and Canada, then you have a different background. So with that variety, I think it's a great mixture of people that's coming back here, helping Vietnamese economy to grow in the first 20 or 30 years. These are the people who bring a lot of those sort of understanding and skill set back. And it's a bit complicated, but I think it's useful for Vietnam because we have this big group of people with skill set that's contributing to Vietnamese economic growth. And I think that continues today.
So you would, if you have young people, you would advise them, I guess, to go to the foreign country for their studies, for
Sure.
working. Which country? And you're not allowed to say Canada?
Well, I actually 80%, almost 80% of our professional staff here at VinaCapital have an overseas education.
Okay.
In the first half of my life, the first 15 years, it's so mostly VQ coming back to work. But the last 10 to 15 years are mostly Vietnamese, born in Vietnam, raised in Vietnam, and only go study abroad for maybe 4 to 5 years and come back. So those are we call the next generation of professional that's coming back. That's one of the key growth area for Vietnam today. Because you look at the top 5 global student abroad, I believe Vietnam is one of the top 5 globally.
Who go abroad for 4 or 5 years?
Yes.
Would you consider them also as VQ? Or is that a different...
I not yet, because they have not completely immersed into that foreign country culture yet. But they do have a hybrid. Some would argue those study abroad even would be better for a company like us, because they have enough exposure to Western idea and culture, but at the same time they still deep rooted here. And they speak Vietnamese better, write better, because some of the VQ coming back, they cannot read and write Vietnamese because they've been growing up in Germany or Japan or somewhere else.
So let's change a little bit the topic. Let's talk logistics and supply chain management, because as Kühne Logistics University, obviously this is something we're very interested in. And you're doing a lot of things in logistics, supply chain management. You have your Vietnam Infrastructure Limited Fund.
Yes.
So can you explain a little bit the logistics landscape in Vietnam? I only know that it's still more expensive transportation than in other countries in Southeast Asia. Can you explain why, and what does Vietnam have to do to get more competitive maybe in this area?
Well, firstly, Vietnam is a very trade-dependent country, right? We do a lot of export and import. I think we will have one of the highest GDP percentage of trading among any country in the world. So that means logistics is important. a lot of transportation, a lot of manufacturing, a lot of import-export. And so logistics is one of the key sector of importance in Vietnam. And it's growing very fast. And the requirement investment in the logistics sector is huge because you can see Vietnam is a very long country. So you have to transport from north to south and so on and so forth. And one of the reasons why the cost is quite high in Vietnam today, because the industry itself is very fragmented. So many small trucking company, many small shipping company, but there's no larger consolidated. Second is that they don't use enough technology. They should. We have not gone to more modernizing our logistic industry, where things can be more efficient between the 3P going everywhere. So fragmentation, too many small company. Logistically, we are quite a long country, so transportation is expensive, and we are not modernized enough in terms of using technology to reduce costs. But I think these are the area, from investment perspective, I think it's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity. Okay, so if you had to convince a young student to study logistics, supply chain management, how would you make that attractive? Because usually students, at least in Europe, they think logistics sounds extremely boring, sounds like not dynamic, so they have because usually students have this impression of it's a truck driver or a container ship. So how would you make it attractive for young people?
Well, I think for Vietnam at least, I think that logistics for young people is going to be very exciting if they can study the modern technique of logistics and they can apply that here because we need it here. So, logistic in a sense that if you're the logistic manager who manage the efficiency of the whole company, or if you are someone who can consolidate all the factory or warehouses, or if you are someone who can put together a platform where you can go air cargo, warehousing, trucking, and shipping on one go, that could be very exciting. So it's all about, what you want to do. Logistics is much more than just trucking, like you said, or shipping.
I just come from the Green Economy Forum exhibition here in Ho Chi Minh City, organized by Eurochem. So it's all about sustainability. Is that an important thing in logistics? Should it be?
Definitely, and one of our company that we invest is called Loiv.
Okay.
And so what did Loiv do? It's like an Uber for trucking, but for Vietnam.
Okay.
So they would, because right now many of the truck going from central Vietnam to Ho Chi Minh City, they deliver the good and they go back empty. So it's polluted because the truck coming back is inefficient. So what Loiv does is connecting user to trucker.
Okay.
So that the trucker, before they going back empty truck to central Vietnam, they can pick up, what needs to be filled before they go back. So you reduce a lot of pollution. Instead of going 4 directions, you just go twice, for example. Okay. So that's part of sustainability, is using technology to improve it. Obviously, Vin Group is trying to do some electric trucking and so on and so forth. But again, it's technology that's going to help on sustainability.
That's only for trucks or also for motorbikes?
Motorbike, I think a lot of the VinFast car now is using for taxi, and I think there's a big push for all the taxi fleet in Vietnam into electric vehicle. So those area is slowly, it's happening.
Somebody talked to me about the motorbike culture in Vietnam.
Yes.
Huge motorbike culture, which also makes transportation in one way easier and the other way a lot more difficult.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about Germany, because I know you have a lot of connections in some way to Germany. When you founded VinaCapital, one of your co-founders or partners is German. So how would you describe German culture to a Vietnamese?
Interesting. Well, you're right. One of my original partner is named Horst Geike, co-founded the company with me and another partner. Of course, we separate ways because we have different vision. But I would define 3 words for German. It's punctual,
Uh-huh.
serious, and very
Serious.
orderly.
Very
Orderly.
orderly, yeah.
So I would say those are the three when I first think about German.
Too serious or just enough serious?
Quite serious.
Quite serious, yeah, I would agree on that. And if you had to describe the Vietnamese culture to a German?
Okay. Well, let's see. Vietnamese culture would be entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you see all the shop everywhere.
Yeah.
I would say entrepreneur, dynamic, and flexible.
Okay.
So we adapt quite easily. You can see that many things in the market or in business and in even politics, you have to bamboo. So we're adaptable,
Yeah.
we're dynamic, and we're definitely entrepreneur.
Well, that must have been an interesting cooperation then, because, in between.
So it's completely opposite.
It's the opposite. Yeah. Exactly. So that must. Well, but then again, if you manage to manage these opposite sides, then probably you have a lot of success, because you managed already to do the most difficult part. So, as you know, KLU, we plan to enter Vietnam with our own campus here, as a German institution entering Vietnam, Vietnamese society, higher education landscape. What would you advise us, what we should do, what we should absolutely not do to avoid any mistakes?
Well, firstly, of course, you need to study institution that gone ahead of you.
Mm-hmm.
There's RMIT, there's the British University in Hanoi. So perhaps firstly look at their model, how they enter Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And maybe we can learn some of the lessons that they done successfully and the challenge they face. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. Second is that I believe that KLU coming to Vietnam with a campus is a great opportunity, it's a great idea.
Thank you.
And I think it should be done sooner rather than later, if possible, because education is a growth industry. It doesn't have to be profitable, but definitely it's what is needed in Vietnam, and it's a growth area because most of the parents in Vietnam, if they have money, they save for the kids, they should put them to school. Education is the key. And you can see the number of students that study abroad in Vietnam is huge. Mm-hmm. That's because there's lack of quality education in Vietnam. The higher end, the university. I think Vietnam great with K to 12. Mm-hmm. The basic education, we're great. We're good with those. Yeah. That's why the STEM mark and the school, the skill set is great. Mm. But once you pass the K to 12, we're not that great. Okay. So that's an opportunity for KU.
We're working on it. Last question. You came back to Vietnam, I think almost
30 years.
30 years, yeah. 3 decades ago. If you had to describe every decade how the economy changed, how the country changed, how leadership changed, how you maybe changed, how would you describe that?
Well, in the last 30 years, so let's say the first phase, first 10 years, is more on exploring and discovery. When I was at PwC, it's when you're trying to learn and taking in what's happening around you. The second decade, when I first launched VinaCapital, is when you start to build a business. You're more aggressive, you're building our business. The last decade, I would say, is more on sustainability. It's not about aggressive growth, but about how you can keep VinaCapital as a brand sustainable and grow it for the next 50 years. So those are the three sort of exploratory, building the business, and make it sustainable.
Don Lam, thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you.
And you all, thanks for listening, watching. See you next time. I think next time we're going to be in Hamburg again, because now we have been quite a lot in Ho Chi Minh City, which is great and exciting, but we're coming back to Hamburg too.
Thank you.
Thank you.